What's going on, you guys? TBR here, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and TGIF to all of you out there. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the updates to the Tower of Trials. More specifically, we are going to be taking a look at the boss battle against Boss Syndrome Original Zero on Tier 80, because I know a lot of people out there have been having difficulties with this boss fight, and I figured that I would go ahead and show you guys the team that I used to clear it, and the strategy that I used to clear it as well. So hopefully that clears up any issues you might have. Now, I will say that you guys are going to notice that today's video's format is going back to what we used to do for a format here on the channel back last year. Unfortunately, this is because the PC client for the King of Fighters All-Star continues to have issues on my end today. For whatever reason, it's just decided it's going to act really wonky. So yeah, I guess it's just going to be one of those days where we're going to have to do this the good old-fashioned way. But before we go ahead and get into all of that and more, make sure if you guys haven't already done so, you smash that like button and subscribe. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the video. Cue that intro. Alright, you guys, in today's video I'm going to be walking you through how I was able to clear Tier 80 of the new Tower of Trials against Boss Syndrome Original Zero. So in this video I'm going to be walking you through the team composition, giving you some tips and advice on how to counter him, and hopefully by the end of this, after you've seen the footage and heard the explanation on how to take him on, you too will be able to finish this fight. I know a lot of people have been having trouble against this boss and find it to be quite cheesy, so hopefully this advice gets you guys through this fight. Now, with that being said, this is going to require you to have a Street Fighter composition, so if you just got into the game, chances are you're not going to have any chance in hell at beating this thing anyway at your level, so don't worry, this is pretty much going to be something that isn't necessarily endgame content, but is pretty veteran content for most people. So if you're somebody that's brand new, there's nothing I could do to help you anyway. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is going to be the team composition that I'm going to recommend that each and every single one of you use if you can possibly do so. Do not worry about the awakening levels of these characters too much. I have seen people be able to clear this using this team composition at lower awakening levels, so you don't need to worry about having like an A7 Akuma or anything like that. So with that being said, why are we using the three characters that I am recommending? So there's going to be two main reasons here, right? The first one is going to be the immunity core. So on Satsui no Hado, you're going to see that Akuma becomes immune to damage for 4 seconds when his HP is 30% or less on a cooldown of 10 seconds. This is going to be a core that every one of these characters on this team is going to share, right? All of these characters are going to have this exact same core on their kit. So this is very important, because basically what this means is you're going to be able to counter the most annoying and cheesy part of this fight very easily, which is going to be him throwing out that core finisher constantly. That core finisher is going to be where he derives most of his damage from, and thanks to the fact that all three of these characters are going to feature this immunity, and in the case of Chun-Li, she even has a bubble shield, which is additional help here. But if we take a look, you're going to notice that they all have this. So what this basically means is whenever Original Zero uses that finisher, what you can do is you can time it to where you can go ahead and tag during that finisher, tag in a character that has that immunity core active and ready to go, and you can tag them in, that way they don't take any damage, and then you can go ahead and fire off your interrupt, so that way you can start your chaining your skills again, use your awakening spam, whatever it is that you have available to you at the time. So that is going to be what you're going to do to counter that finishing move spam from Original Zero. You're basically going to take advantage of this immunity core, and you're going to basically try to get it into a rhythm to where you're going to be able to easily just tag in and out and cycle through your characters and kind of just have that immunity core active constantly during that finisher. If you can do that, then you're going to be able to find that this is a pretty easy fight for the most part. You'll just have to be pretty smart about how you play it, and it's going to take a little bit of practice to get that rhythm down. But once you're able to get into that pattern of immunity, you're going to be in great shape. So I told you guys that there are two main reasons why we're using these characters specifically. I've already given you the first big one, which is going to be juggling that immunity on that finisher. The other reason is going to be explosion. So if we take a look here, the explosion that all three of these characters share is very important. The reason why is going to be for the fact that when it comes to explosion, kind of like what you guys have seen in things such as high levels of Reviving Hell's Dungeon, what you can go ahead and do is exploit the fact that you're going to be able to circumvent most of these things that are going to be penalties in these different game modes. Using this explosion, you can go ahead and get that set big damage really easily just for using that skill with the proper dot applied. So basically what we're going to be relying on here is going to be Ryu and Akuma primarily as far as this team comp is concerned for damage, because they are going to have the highest damage on these teams. So that is going to be what we're going to focus on, is going to be those two as far as our main damage dealers. And then your third spot is kind of a flex. I would say Chun-Li is the best overall option, again, because she does have that immunity core. She's also going to be able to cast that shield, which is something that she has a bit of a leg up on the other two guys with. So that's very important stuff to note. And she also is going to have explosion as well on her kit. So in general, this is going to be an extremely strong character that everybody should have, and therefore, if you have her, then you can go ahead and use her, and you will find that she is quite useful here, along with a lot of other things in the game. But that is going to be the reason why we're primarily going to be choosing these three, because we can get that set amount of damage with that explosion and be able to keep that consistent damage going. We're also going to have that extra long awakening spam thanks to the fact that all these characters are EX, and we are also going to be able to take advantage of that immunity core. So those are kind of the things that you're going to be doing throughout the fight as far as trying to figure out how to take as little damage as humanly possible. Another reason why you would want to go ahead and tag out to another character that has active immunity left on them is you would also want to tag out if your character gets poisoned. Because this boss is going to be able to also poison you, tagging out whenever you get that poison applied to you, so that way you can get a character with immunity in and you don't take all that poison damage, is another really big thing that I would say I would recommend in this fight, because that's also going to save you a lot of damage in the long run. Really, this is a trial of patience more than anything. Your characters, depending on their awakening level, aren't going to necessarily, outside of the explosion, be dealing a ton of damage most of the time. So kind of what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just figure out a way to try and get through this over time and not try to rush the fight. If you try to rush the fight, you're going to end up getting yourself into a bad situation, and being the fact that you only have 3 runs per day, you have to be very patient and very careful. So that is going to be the main points of the team. Another thing that I would recommend is to go ahead and use your 3 PG finishers in this fight whenever possible. Firing off those finishers, basically what that is going to mean, being that almost all of them are going to be around 10 seconds long, is you're going to basically be able to stall the amount of time between the next time that Original Zero is going to throw out his own finisher. And what you're going to be able to do there is you're going to buy your team enough time to get that immunity core back up, which is very important. So you're going to notice that once you're able to start getting your 3 PGs going, you're going to have a much easier time dancing around those finishers from Original Zero and dodging out on a lot of that damage using that immunity core, because you're almost always going to have it active as long as you were able to fire off a few skills and one of your 3 PG finishers from your characters. So that is another recommendation there. Let's talk about other things with the team comp. I am using 2 healing strikers here, so you can kind of move those around depending on what your needs are. This is how I have it built out. You can move them around if you need to. The reason why I would recommend the healing strikers is going to be because this is going to accomplish a few things, right? So basically, being that that core functions the way that it does, if you take a look here, the way that it functions is you're going to become immune to damage for 4 seconds when your HP is 30% or less on a cooldown of 10 seconds. Basically what that means is because you are going to have a cooldown on there, and it's also going to have an HP threshold that you need to fall below, having the ability to heal your character up kind of gets you into a rhythm where you can keep resetting that immunity core as long as you can keep that character going above that 30% consistently with that heal. That is very important. It helps out quite a bit. Heals in this are very, very good. It's not like Daimo's base used to be, where heals were kind of just useless at a certain point whenever they buffed it or updated it or whatever you want to say that they did to it at the time. But basically, heals are very, very good here. So I'd highly, highly recommend using healing strikers. These are the two that I'm using. And then the third one's kind of a flex position. But in general, that's what I've got there. So that's basically going to be the team comp. Let's go ahead and talk about the cards, right? So the cards that I would recommend here shouldn't be anything that's too surprising. I'm actually going to recommend that you guys use the 10,000 Blows set if you have it. Conversely, the newest card set that is going to be in the EX Volume 2 banner, being that it's also going to have this immunity on it, I would recommend that one as well if you have that one instead, because these characters are going to be native EX fighters. Otherwise, you can go ahead and just use this one. If you don't have those, you could always use something potentially like an Akane or whatever the case may be if you really want to, or you can use whatever the best in slot cards are for these characters as well. I just prefer this guy here because this is going to give me an extra buffer. It's going to give me an extra save in case something goes wrong in the fight and I need that extra save there. So basically say, for instance, for whatever reason, you mess up your juggling of your characters and your immunity core on the character itself has already been used up. Once you fall below 10%, you can go ahead and pop this one off and get that extra save in there. Maybe that gives you enough time to tag out. Maybe that gives you enough time to be able to use a healing striker, whatever the case may be. But basically, that is the reason why I like these types of cards here for this fight, because they are going to help you with that extra save, and that's kind of important in this fight. So that's basically going to be why I use that. As far as your option cards go for your characters, really, I would recommend that you go ahead and use the ones that are going to be specific to your Street Fighter characters to buff their explosion, because the explosion is going to be the main focal point of their damage. Otherwise, when it comes to your option cards, the biggest thing is just firing off skills as fast as possible. So if you have things such as this guy here, or if you have these guys here, or this guy here from the Gintama collaboration, whatever the case may be, your 1.9 second cooldown cards, those are going to be really, really nice as well. In general, you can kind of just use whatever you want here, but those are the things that I would recommend. Really, the most important part of this is going to be the set cards, because the set cards are of the utmost importance on your team. I don't expect everybody to have full 3 sets, so what I actually used on my Akuma is I went actually ahead here and used this because he's my main damage dealer. So I did go ahead and use this set here in order to get a little bit of extra damage in this fight, and it ended up paying off in the end. So that's pretty much what I have as far as the builds go. You guys can take a look at the stones if you want to, but there's really not a whole lot here that has changed from my fighters from before when you would have seen them. Really, largely when it comes to anything with the stones, those have pretty much been set since I got these characters, but just in case you haven't seen those videos before, that's going to be what you're going to see there. So that is going to be the team I would recommend. That's going to be some of the different things I would say to you guys as far as tips and advice on how to get through this fight. Like I said, whenever he uses that 3PG finisher, or that core finisher rather, for Original Zero, you just want to go ahead and swap out if your character doesn't have their immunity up during that animation. You want to switch out to one of these guys, and that way they can go ahead and get their damage immunity core off, and that way you aren't taking all that damage. If he applies poison to you, also swap out kind of the same thing, and then beyond that, use your 3PG finishers when available, so that way you can kind of buy a little bit of time so you can make sure that your immunity is off cooldown. And in general, it shouldn't be that difficult. You're going to see in the footage that I actually kind of face rolled this at a certain point once I was able to get into that rhythm. Really, it just comes down to getting into that pattern of being able to swap in and out and have that immunity core always active, and from there you are absolutely golden. So that is going to be what I would recommend there. Now let's talk about the team I actually used. Yes, I did go ahead and use Bison here. Why? Because I'm a fan. He is terrible for this fight, and I would not recommend that you use him here. I had actually decided to try to defeat this really with just using 2 characters based on a dare, and yeah, well, you guys know how I am with dares. I end up taking advantage of those, and sometimes I win them, sometimes I lose them. In this instance, I did win. However, it was in no thanks to Bison. So Bison I would definitely not recommend. The reason I wouldn't recommend Bison, he does not have that immunity. So being the fact that he does not have that immunity, that is very important. If he doesn't have it, it is going to automatically make him lesser than the rest of these characters. And in general, what you're going to see here is that, yeah, I wasn't impressed by his performance, but thankfully Ryu and Akuma were able to get into a rhythm, being able to tag in and out to each other with those immunity cores, and that was pretty much all I needed to get through this. So I would not recommend using Bison. Do not pass go, do not collect 200 on Bison. That is not what I would recommend. What I would recommend is this team right here, like we talked about. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get into the footage using this team, and if you're wondering, yes, I did go ahead and use 10,000 blows on Bison in this footage, so it doesn't really matter because you're not going to use Bison and make that same mistake. So let's go ahead now and get into the footage. I'm going to show you guys hands-on how this fight went and kind of the process that went into it, and that way you guys can see all of what I've been talking about in action. So let's just go ahead and jump into the footage. Alright you guys, so let's go ahead and see what the team looks like in action and explain this stuff hands-on. So the beginning of the fight, you're basically going to be having to concede the fact that you're going to be taking damage. There's really not a lot of ways around it. When he fires off this finisher here, he's going to be giving you a ton of damage because you do not have the ability to use your immunity core until you get below 30% health. So at the beginning, don't worry too much about it, but of course try not to take any extra additional damage as best you can. So right here, you're going to see that I'm just going to go ahead and try to get as many skills off and as much damage as possible. Right here, I was able to catch him, so I knew he was going to use his finisher. I dodged behind him using Bison, and I was able to go ahead and dodge out on that damage. It is important to note that the core finisher on Original Zero is not full screen, so you can technically cheese him if you can get far enough away from him during that animation. That way you don't have to take that damage. But right here we use our 3PG finisher, and once he gets back up, we know he's going to go ahead and use his finisher again. So what we're going to do is we're going to tag into Ryu here, a nice fresh character. We have the healing striker as Athena there, so she's going to be able to top him off on heals. So that is going to keep him nice and healthy here. So basically, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to go through our awakening spam, try to get as much explosion damage on this boss as possible, go back to using our finisher when we know he's going to want to use his own again to buy some time here, just to try and get past that. Then there we go, uses his finisher. We can go ahead and take a little bit of that damage. Again, remember, our immunity cores are not active until we drop below 30% health. So we're just going to keep rotating our characters, using our awakening rotations, trying to get a 3PG finisher off in the meantime before he uses his, and then he's going to go back in and he's going to use his to follow this up, and so on and so forth. So you can pretty much see the pattern that he gets into. It's pretty basic. It's not something that is too hard to gauge. So right there, we have our immunity core now, and because Bison doesn't have an immunity core, he's in for a bad time right here. He gets poisoned. I should tag out, but I'm not going to because screw you, Bison, we don't even need you anyway. So Bison's dead. Now we can go ahead and just get into the meat and the potatoes, which is going to be Ryu and Akuma. We have our immunity cores active, so this is where the real fun begins, right? So I told you guys, use your healing strikers to keep your characters healed up, so that way you can keep exploiting that heal, and that way you can also fire off that immunity core more often in the fight. And you're going to see that the Athena striker in particular gives you a really nice amount of heals. We've talked about her in the past, a fantastic striker option, so you can see that here with Ryu. Now we know, again, once he gets back up and he gets back on his feet, he is going to want to go ahead and use that finisher. There it is. So now our Ryu drops down. He's got the immunity. We drop in our Akuma. He's got the immunity. And we're going to go back in and use our healing striker and our awakening spam. So as you guys can see, if you are able to get this stuff timed correctly, you are going to have yourself a pretty easy time with this. You're seeing a pretty distinct pattern with the attacks for this fighter now, and hopefully this is giving you guys a good idea of how he works. But right there I used my finisher, he's going to use his again, we're going to drop back down, we're going to drop Ryu in, he's got his immunity, we're going to go ahead and use our healing striker again, so that way we can keep the pattern going, and we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing over and over and over again, guys. And again, this is where patience comes in, and so I know for a lot of people out there, and right there I did miss my 3PG, keep that in mind. However, I had my immunity core, so we were safe. No big deal, so we can just keep going. You'll start to kind of get the muscle memory down. You'll kind of know when it's been 10 seconds eventually. Sometimes you won't even need to use your 3PG finisher. You can kind of just, in lieu of that, use your explosion a little bit more if you have the time. So in general, just kind of get that timing down and you'll kind of know exactly where you're at with your fighters. So right here, we know that's coming, so we're not going to use the awakening spam. We're just going to go straight back into Ryu to be safe. We're going to go ahead and fire off our immunity so that way we can keep on top of him. We're going to use the Athena healing striker. We're going to use the 3PG finisher, and then he's going to go in and he's going to use his finisher again, so on and so forth, you guys. It's very, very simple how this fight works. And once you get this down, you guys can pretty much tell really what we're doing is we're exploiting our immunity, our hyper armor, our healing strikers, our 3PG finishers. We know when he's going to use his finisher, and in general, this is a pretty darn easy fight in my opinion once you get this down. So again, we had our immunity, we stayed in just because we had just gotten it up, so we were pretty well set there. We can go ahead and tag in Ryu, keep the damage going with the awakening rotation, and just keep this going. Now right here, you're going to see knocked him down. We know when he gets up, he's going to use his finisher again, so that's our cue to use our 3PG. That way we can keep Ryu alive here, because we know that our Akuma might not have his immunity back up quite yet. So now we know we're safe, so he's going to get up. He's going to use his finisher again. We know our Ryu is going to take a little damage, but that's okay because we have the immunity on the Akuma. He jumps in, and this is pretty much where we can go ahead and call this a fight. So hopefully this answered the question of how to defeat this guy for all of you guys. I know a lot of people have been asking me how to beat him. A lot of people have been acting as if he might be impossible to beat. That is not the case. This is a fairly easy way to get it done if you can go ahead and get yourself into that rhythm. Like I said, it's going to take practice. Practice makes perfect with anything in this game, but I really like this new game mode. I'm enjoying the challenge. I'm enjoying figuring out new and interesting ways to get through these boss fights. If you guys found this beneficial, as always, smash that like button and subscribe. If you have additional questions, leave them in the comments section, but I will talk to you guys in the next video. I hope you all found it informative, but until the next one, you all take care. Peace.
Continue.